Picture a city built on land that doesn't exist. No, seriously. Take a map of Boston from 1630 and lay it over a map of Boston from 1883, and roughly a third of the modern city is sitting on top of water that used to be there. The Back Bay neighbourhood, all those elegant brownstones, all those gaslit streets. That's a swamp. Or it was. They filled it in with gravel and dirt hauled by train from the suburbs, 35 carloads a day for decades, until the swamp became something you could build on, and then something you could charge enormous rent for. Boston is a city that invented itself while people were still living in it. Now fill that invented city with 300,000 people, packed into neighbourhoods so dense that whole families sleep in shifts, not because they want to, but because there aren't enough beds for everyone to sleep at once. Add the smell of a harbour where fish have been unloaded and gutted every morning for 200 years, the sulphur and rot, smell of coal gas from the new gasworks over in Roxbury, the particular sweetness of horse manure on cobblestones that have been collecting it since the Revolution. Add a winter so cold that the pipes freeze and the Charles River turns solid enough to skate on. Add a summer so hot and airless in the tenements that people sleep on their rooftops, or don't sleep at all. That's Boston. A place where you could hear a symphony orchestra in a concert hall designed by the finest architect in the country, and then walk 3 blocks north and find a family of 7 living in 2 rooms without a window. A place where a Brahmin in a silk cravat and a fishmonger from County Cork might stand on the same street corner waiting for the same horse-drawn streetcar. A place where the old Puritan bones of the city keep poking through the skin of modernity, where churches that George Washington once prayed in stand in the shadows of new office blocks going up 6, 7, 8 stories tall. A place where, if you knew the right people, you could become something. And if you didn't know the right people, which most people didn't, you could disappear entirely. We're going back there tonight. Not as tourists walking the Freedom Trail and buying chowder in Faneuil Hall. We're going back the other way, down the stairs, below street level, into the room that doesn't appear on any floor plan, that the landlady doesn't mention when she shows prospective tenants around, that the city inspectors haven't visited in years. We're living 1 year in the basement room beneath a Boston boarding house in 1883. I make these history stories and I genuinely don't know if anyone falls asleep to them, or if you're all just people who've discovered that hearing about coal dust and dead fish and tenement fires is somehow more relaxing than whatever's actually keeping you awake. Either way, subscribe if you want, get comfortable, pull whatever blanket you have up to your chin. Here we go, your eyes open, to darkness. Not the comfortable darkness of a bedroom with curtains drawn, not the pleasant darkness of a house asleep. This is the kind of darkness that has weight to it. You're underground. The ceiling above you is also the floor of the kitchen, and you can hear, even now, even at 4 in the morning, the creak of footsteps. Someone up there is already moving, already starting the day in that kitchen that you'll never be allowed to sit in, at that table you'll never be invited to use. Give it a moment. Let your eyes adjust to nothing. There's a slit of almost light under the door, not gas light. The boarding house doesn't run gas lines to the basement. What you're seeing is the reflection of the street lamp outside, bouncing off the flagstone of the narrow areaway that drops below street level to your door, filtered through a window barely larger than a brick, so caked with coal dust and city grime that even direct sunlight comes through as something grey and unconvincing. This is your room. Now let the smell arrive. It always arrives second because your brain is merciful. and gives you one moment of confusion before it hands you the full truth of where you are. The first thing you smell is coal. Not the clean smell of coal burning, which at least has warmth in it. This is the smell of coal just existing. The pile of it in the corner, the black dust ground into the earthen floor, the residue of it in the creases of your hands, the shadow of it on every surface. Coal has a mineral coldness to it. You smell like iron and old stone and something faintly alive, because coal is alive, in a geological sense. It's the compressed bodies of things that lived 300 million years ago. And sometimes in the dark of this basement room you can almost believe that. Underneath the coal, damp, the basement walls sweat. This is a problem that no amount of whitewash has fixed in the building's 30-year history, because the water table under the south end is high and the foundation is inadequate, and the landlady, Mrs. Hannigan, of whom more later, has no particular incentive to fix what the people paying the least can complain about least. The damp has gotten into the mattress. The damp has gotten into your clothes. The damp has gotten, on bad nights, into your bones. Underneath the damp, the smell of the furnace itself. The big coal furnace that takes up most of the basement room next to yours, the iron monster that you're paid, if paid is the right word, and it's really not quite the right word, to keep burning through the cold months. The furnace has a smell that isn't fire exactly. It's older than fire. It's the smell of metal that has been hot for so long, it's forgotten what cold feels like. And underneath all of that, the smell that no one in this building would acknowledge, and no one in this building can escape. The smell of too many people living in too small a space. Soap and sweat and cooking and the chamber pots that get emptied into the yard out back every morning. The specific damp wool smell of clothes dried indoors because there's nowhere else to dry them. The smell of yesterday's supper still alive in the air. Salt fish and boiled cabbage, including you. You smell like all of this too. You know it the way you know the colour of your own eyes, abstractly, as a fact about yourself, without being able to actually perceive it anymore. Welcome to Boston, Massachusetts. The year is 1883. The month is November. The temperature outside, if the thin whistling through the foundation gap is any indication, is somewhere below freezing. And the furnace has gone low in the night. You know this without getting up. You know it the way you know your own heartbeat, by its absence. When the furnace is properly fed and burning well, there's a low, steady vibration that comes up through the floor of your room, through the mattress, into your spine. A sound below sound. When that vibration stops, you wake up. It has stopped. You have maybe an hour before the people upstairs notice the cold. You get up. Your feet hit the floor. The floor is packed earth covered with the single layer of flagstone, and even through the wool socks you sleep in, you learned in your first week here that bare feet on this floor in winter is a lesson you only need to learn once. The cold comes up through the stone like it's climbing toward you personally. Your breath makes fog in the darkness. The matches are on the shelf above the coal bin. You know exactly where they are without needing light to find them, the way you know every inch of this room. The low ceiling that you've stopped ducking for because your body has learned the precise geography of beams without consulting your brain. The single wooden chair with the cracked rung. The nail on the wall where your better coat hangs. The basin on the floor in the corner that you washed your face in last night and that by morning has a skin of ice on. Top that you'll have to break with your knuckle. The match catches. In the brief orange flare of it, the room exists completely. Walls gleaming with damp, the irregular shadows of the coal pile in the corner, the mattress on the floor with its stripe ticking stained the colour of old tea, the single window above street level showing nothing but the dark rectangle of early morning Boston, the door to the furnace room that is also your job, and also, in the deepest winter, the only thing standing between the people upstairs and a genuinely dangerous cold. You light the candle on the shelf. It's a tallow candle, the cheap kind, and it smells faintly of the animal it came from when it burns, but it gives enough light to work by. The furnace room is through the door, and you open it, and the residual warmth of yesterday's fire comes out to meet you like a greeting. The furnace itself is a sight. A household comfort number 8, it says on the iron plate above the firebox door, and the name has a joke to it that the manufacturers probably didn't intend. Nothing about this furnace says comfort. It's 4 feet tall and 3 feet wide, a cast iron box on squat cast iron legs, with a firebox door and an ash door, and a series of damper levers along the side that regulate the draft, and that you have learned, through painful trial and error, are the difference between a furnace that warms a building and a furnace that backs up and fills the whole basement with smoke and sends everyone stumbling out coughing at 2 a.m. You've done that twice, not this year. You open the firebox door. Inside, banked coals still holding their shape, grey-white and crumbled at the edges, but with a deep orange glow still alive in the centre. Not dead, not yet. You can work with this. The coal scoop is hung on a hook to the right of the furnace. It holds about 12 pounds of coal when it's full. You fill it from the bin against the wall. Your arms know the weight of it, the slightly pulling strain in your right shoulder where you've scooped 10,000 times, the way the coal shifts and settles when you lift, and you feed it into the firebox carefully, not too much at once. The instinct when a fire is low is to smother it with fuel. The result of that instinct is a smothered fire. You add the coal in 2 stages, wait for the existing embers to catch the new fuel, watch the colour shift from grey-orange to red to the clean yellow-white of a fire that's found its footing again. Then you add more. There's a particular sound when the furnace is burning right. A low, rushing roar, almost below the threshold of hearing, that comes up through the iron and into your hands when you rest them on the door frame. You can feel the difference between a struggling fire and a healthy one the way you can feel a fever in someone's forehead. Not through measurement, but through a kind of intimacy with the thing. You've been doing this since September. Your name is Cormac Riordan. You're 21 years old. You arrived in Boston 8 months ago on a White Star steamer from Queenstown in a third-class berth that you shared with 11 other men, and that smelled, by the 3rd day out, of the collective inside of every one of those 11 men, which is a smell you're not going to describe to polite company ever in your life. You had £2 and 4 shillings when you left Ireland, which your mother had been saving in a crock under the floorboards since you were 14 years old, and a letter of introduction to a man named Dermot Feeney, who was supposed to be your father's cousin's husband, and who turned out to have died of typhoid fever in 1879, so you arrived in Boston knowing no one. By the end of the first week, through a chain of introductions that passed through a Galway man on the docks, a woman from Sligo who ran a laundry on Washington Street, and a hard-faced priest at St. Patrick's who listened to your situation with the expression of a man hearing something he's heard 800 times and still doesn't have a solution for. You had this job, stoker, furnace man, the person who lives in the basement and keeps the building warm. In exchange, the room and meals, 1 meal a day, midday, taken in the kitchen with the door open, meaning you eat standing in the doorway while the cook, a Galway woman named Bridget, who has never once offered you her last name, works around you with the efficient hostility of someone who has decided that your presence in her domain is a fact of life she will tolerate but not accommodate, and $1.50 a week in wages, which is not quite nothing and not quite enough. The furnace is burning properly now. You can feel it in the floor. The vibration is back. You put the coal scoop back on its hook and close the firebox door and stand there for a moment in the warmth. Outside, somewhere in the streets above, a horse is making the specific kind of distressed sound that means a wagon has come to grief on an icy patch of cobblestone. There's the grinding crash of something wooden breaking, the muffled shout of a driver, then silence. Boston, 4 a.m. You go back to your room. You do not go back to sleep. By 6, the house is fully awake. You know this not because you can see it, but because you can hear it. The boarding house at 47 Dewey Street, South End, Boston, has 4 floors above the basement, and each floor tells you something different through the ceiling above your head. The kitchen floor tells you when Bridget arrives and starts the fire in the cook stove, which she does at exactly 5:45 every morning, because the sound of the iron door and the scrape of the grate is as reliable as a clock. From the kitchen floor you can also hear the specific slap of bread dough being worked on the table, which means it's a bread day, which means the kitchen will smell of yeast and toasting by 8, and your single permitted midday meal will include a good slice of white bread, which matters more than it probably should. The first floor above that is the Hannigan family's private quarters. Mr. and Mrs. Hannigan, who owns the house, and their 2 daughters, who are 15 and 17 and who you've seen approximately 6 times in 8 months, each time from a distance, as they are not in the habit of coming to the basement and you are not in the habit of being invited upstairs. The sounds from the Hannigan floor are domestic and specific. The click of heels on hardwood that is Mrs. Hannigan doing whatever Mrs. Hannigan does in the mornings, the lower thump of Mr. Hannigan's heavier step as he prepares for whatever it is Mr. Hannigan does with his days, which, based on the hours he keeps and the quality of his overcoat, is something in business, probably trade, possibly banking on a minor scale. The second and third floors are the boarding rooms, 12 rooms total, each housing between 1 and 3 people, because Mrs. Hannigan charges by the room, and the boarders have learned to subdivide the cost by subdividing the space. You know their names the way you know a geography you've never visited, from signs and sounds and fragments of overheard conversation without a complete picture. There's Mr. Donahue on the 2nd floor rear, who works at the counting house on Summer Street and comes home every evening smelling of ink and pipe tobacco and the slightly sour note of a man who is anxious about money. His floor above your head is careful and quiet, the footsteps of someone who has learned to take up as little space as possible. There are the Moriarty brothers on the 2nd floor front, 3 of them in 2 rooms which Mrs. Hannigan rents to them as a single unit and pretends not to know the 3rd is there. They work construction, currently on a new commercial building going up on Tremont Street. They come home at 6 every evening with the particular heaviness of men whose bodies have been used hard, and on Friday nights when they've been paid they come home later and louder, and you can trace their progress from the front door to their rooms by the sound of laughter and something breaking and the muffled but heartfelt creative profanity of men blowing off a week's worth of compressed frustration. You don't resent the Moriarty brothers. If anything, you understand them better than anyone else in the building. You know what it's like to have a body that work has used up by 6 in the evening. You know the specific pleasure of a Friday night when the week is finally behind you. You've never been invited to join them. There's a school teacher on the 3rd floor, a thin, pale woman named Miss Alderton, who you think might be from somewhere in New Hampshire because of the way she talks, and who gives piano lessons on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons to the children of families slightly more prosperous than the ones in this building. The sound of those lessons comes down through the ceiling with a clarity that surprises you. You can hear each note, each hesitation, each patient correction, in a voice so controlled it sounds like it costs her something to keep it that way. And there are others. A printer's assistant who works nights and sleeps days so that his schedule is permanently inverted from everyone else's. A widow from Limerick who keeps to herself and whom you've seen only in glimpses. A man whose name you don't know, who seems to receive visitors at irregular hours, and whose profession is therefore something you've decided not to investigate. You know all of these people by sound. None of them know you at all. By 7, you've restoked the furnace twice more and swept the furnace room floor. Coal dust accumulates with a speed that still surprises you, a black drift of it settling on every surface like a second skin. And you've carried the accumulated ash from the previous day's burning out to the ash bin in the backyard in a metal pail that weighs about 40 pounds when full, and that you heft with both arms because the handle is designed for a man with larger hands than yours. The ash bin is in the yard behind the building, past the privy, past the wood pile, past the fence with its broken 3rd slat that the Hannigan's cat uses as a thoroughfare, to and from the properties on either side. This morning, the yard has a 1/4 inch of ice on every surface. You find this out when you step onto it and your right foot goes out from under you, and you catch yourself on the fence post with both hands, the ash pail swinging and spilling grey-white ash onto the ice, which is at least slightly useful because ash on ice is traction. And you make a mental note to bring a shovelful out here when you get back. Your hands. Let's talk about your hands, because they're a story unto themselves at this point. In Ireland, in the house your parents kept in Clare, you had hands that were calloused from farm work, pulling beets, fixing fences, cutting turf. Ordinary country hands. You were not proud of them, but you were not ashamed of them either. They were hands that worked. 8 months of coal stoking in Boston have turned them into something else. The palms are thick now, the skin built up in layered callus along the grip points. The inside of the thumb, the pads below the fingers, the base of the palm where the handle of the coal scoop sits when you work. The knuckles are rough and slightly swollen from the cold. There are lines of coal dust that no amount of washing fully removes, embedded so deeply in the skin's creases that they've become permanent geography. The right index finger has a scar from the 2nd week, when you caught it on a broken piece of the firebox grate and didn't realise it was serious until the blood made the coal slippery. The skin between the thumb and forefinger of both hands cracks in winter. Not paper cuts, real cracks, deep enough to bleed, deep enough to sting when you plunge your hands into cold water for the morning wash. You've learned to keep them greased with lard when you remember, which you don't always. When you hold your hands up in the candlelight sometimes you think, these look like old man's hands. I am 21. You carry the ash pail to the bin. You shovel ash onto the ice. You go back inside. By 8, you've checked the coal supply. 3 days left in the bin at current rate of consumption, which means you need to arrange a delivery before the weekend, which means you need to tell Mrs. Hannigan, which means navigating Mrs. Hannigan, and you've eaten a piece of cold bread that Bridget handed you through the kitchen doorway without looking at you, the way you might hand a crust to a dog that's been reasonably well behaved, and you've washed your face in the basin. The water in the basin has the brown tinge it always has in the morning. You've stopped thinking about this. You are, at this moment, essentially invisible to the city above you. The people who live in this building walk over you every day. They benefit from the heat you produce. Right now, the first floor is a comfortable 60 degrees because of fires you started at 4 in the morning, and they will never once think about where that warmth comes from. The coal that heats their rooms, the ash that you haul, the drafts you manage, and the fires you coax back from the edge of going out. All of it happens below the floor they stand on, invisible, unacknowledged, unremarkable. You're not allowed to be seen doing the work that keeps this building alive. That thought settles in you this morning, watching the bread brown on the grate, listening to the footsteps above your head. Then you put your coat on, the better one from the nail on the wall, and you go outside. The cold hits you immediately. November in Boston is not interested in being polite about itself. It comes at you from the harbour, which is only a mile, to the east, carrying the specific sharpness of salt water that has been chilling in the North Atlantic since October. It finds every gap in your coat, the place where the second button doesn't quite close anymore, the thin patch on the left elbow, and it enters through those gaps with the thoroughness of water finding the lowest point. You stand on the sidewalk in front of number 47 for a moment, letting your eyes adjust to the early morning grey. Dewey Street is a street of brownstones, 3 and 4 stories, built in the 1850s during the South End's brief moment of ambition, when Boston developers thought they were creating the finest residential neighbourhood in New England. They weren't wrong exactly. For about a decade, the South End was genuinely fashionable. The kind of place where merchant families built their futures and showed their wealth in the depth of their window embrasures and the quality of their iron railings. Then Back Bay happened, when they filled in the swamp on the other side of the common and started building the grid of perfectly level streets with their perfect rows of uniformly elegant brownstones, gaslit, tree-lined, designed by the best architects in Boston. The fashionable families of the South then looked at each other and then looked at Back Bay and understood immediately. They sold, they moved. The South End became something different, a neighbourhood of boarding houses and the families who couldn't afford Back Bay, and immigrants who'd made enough money to move up from the North End but not enough to aspire further, and the working poor who packed into the houses the merchant class had left behind. This is the South End in 1883. Not a slum, not yet, not exactly, but a neighbourhood in the process of becoming something its builders never intended. Your boots crunch on the frost. The street is already alive. A coal wagon is making its morning rounds, the driver bundled to his eyes in wool, the horse steaming. In the cold, the coal rattling in the bed of the wagon like a percussion instrument no one has tuned. A woman 3 houses down is beating a rug over her railing with a methodical violence that suggests it's not really the rug she's thinking about. 2 men in labourers' clothes are standing at the corner, their breath making clouds, waiting for someone or something. A foreman, a day's work, a sign that today will be different from yesterday. You turn toward Washington Street. The city changes within a block. The residential quiet of Dewey Street gives way to the commercial noise of one of Boston's great thoroughfares, and the transition is immediate and total, like stepping from a church into a market. Washington Street in the South End is where Boston does a great deal of its daily business of staying alive. There are grocers whose pyramids of cabbages and turnips and potatoes crowd the sidewalk even in November, the vegetables steaming faintly in the cold. There are butchers, with their wares hung in windows, not pretty meat, not the fine cuts that go to the kitchens of Beacon Hill, but the working cuts, the shin and the shank and the offal that makes cheap stews and feeds families who can't afford to be fastidious. There's a fish stall whose proximity you've identified by smell from 100 yards away. Salt fish and fresh fish, and the particular cold marine smell of ice packed around things that were alive very recently, and are now most definitely not. There are men selling newspapers, the Boston Daily Globe, the Herald, the Post, from the corners with the efficiency of people who've made peace with the cold. A boy of maybe 12, cap pulled down to his eyebrows, is shaking a rolled paper at every passing man with the verbal insistence of someone who has learned that the only way to sell newspapers on a cold morning is to make not buying one feel like the more difficult option. Globe, globe, biggest snowstorm since '67 coming this week. Read all about it, mister. 2 cents. Globe. Globe. You don't have 2 cents to spare on a newspaper, but you stop for a moment to listen, because the man on the corner next to him is reading one aloud to a small circle of listeners. 3 labourers, an old woman with a basket, a boy who might be listening or might just be cold and grateful for a reason to stand still. The story is about the new elevated railroad going up in the city. There's a plan, it says, a plan, not a promise, to build an elevated rail line through the south end, through the north end, connecting the different neighbourhoods with a train that runs above the street. The labourers listening exchange looks. Above the street, one of them says, so the smoke blows into the second-floor windows instead of the first. The others laugh, not warmly, the laugh of people who've heard promises before. You keep walking. The cold has settled into your ears now, that particular deep ache that comes when the temperature is low enough and the wind is persistent enough that it seems to be making a point. You pull your collar up and let yourself be carried by the current of the street. Around you, Boston is doing what Boston does. It's working. Not the elegant work of the offices on State Street or the refined labour of the libraries on Boylston. This is the physical, ground-level, unglamorous work that the city runs on. The man pushing the handcart loaded with barrels. The woman carrying 2 heavy bags, one in each hand, her arms slightly bowed with the weight, her face set in the expression of someone who has calculated exactly how many more steps until she can set them down. The dray horse at the end of the block, patient and steaming, while 2 men unload bolts of cloth from a wagon into the rear entrance of a dry goods store. The smell of bakeries beginning to warm up for the day, the smell of horse, the smell of the city thinking about itself. Your errand this morning is to the offices of a coal merchant on Tremont Street who owes Mrs. Hannigan a letter about a disputed delivery from last month, a delivery that was short by half a ton, and that the merchant claims was full weight, and that Mrs. Hannigan claims was not, and which will be resolved by letters back and forth until one party becomes exhausted enough to concede. Mrs. Hannigan has chosen you as her messenger. This is the entirety of your formal instruction. Bring him this letter. Bring back whatever he gives you. Don't read it. The route takes you through Copley Square. This is deliberate on your part because Copley Square adds 4 blocks to a direct route, and those 4 blocks cost you time that you'll have to make up somewhere. But Copley Square is the place you come to when you need to remember that the world extends beyond the basement and the furnace room and the ash bin in the icy yard. You see it before you reach it. The tower first. Trinity Church rises from Copley Square with a physical confidence that the city around it doesn't quite match. It was completed just 6 years ago, in 1877, and it still has the slight unreality of something too new and too massive to have fully settled into its surroundings. The central tower is 211 feet high, built of Dedham granite and Longmeadow sandstone, the rough-cut stone in 2 tones that catch the November morning light in different ways. The darker granite holding the shadow, the reddish sandstone catching even this thin winter sun and warming it slightly, sending it back into the square with a quality that makes the air around the building seem different from the air 20 feet away. The architect was H. H. Richardson. You don't know this name yet. It will come to you later, from a conversation overheard in a saloon, from a man who worked on the construction and who has opinions about the building's foundations and the difficulty of building anything substantial on filled land. But you understand the building the way you'd understand a sentence spoken in a language you're still learning. You understand that this is serious, that whoever made this was trying to say something. What they were trying to say, you think, is that Boston takes itself seriously, that Boston believes in permanence, that Boston is not a city that builds things lightly. The irony of a city that built its most confident landmark on land that used to be a swamp is not lost on you. In your experience, the things people build most defiantly are usually built over something they'd rather not think about. You stand at the edge of the square and look. The square itself is not yet complete. There are construction hoardings on the south side where work continues on new buildings. The Boston Public Library is planned for the west side but hasn't started yet, and the ground around the church is still rough and unfinished in places, the grandeur of the building slightly undermined by the practical muddle of a city still figuring out what to do with the space around it. But the church itself. The morning light is coming from the southeast, low and clear, and it hits the Romanesque arches of the main entrance and throws shadows so deep you could step into them and disappear. The tower catches the light at its top and the detail work up there, the carved stone, the inlaid tile work, the complexity of it at a distance that turns to a texture of light and shadow, seems to belong to a different scale than the city around it, like it was made for eyes that could hover above the street and look at it properly. Your grandfather was born in a 2-room stone cottage in Clare. The village church had one stained glass window and a roof that leaked every spring. He'd have been afraid to walk into a building like this. He'd have thought it meant for a different kind of person. Maybe he'd have been right. 3 men in good coats are standing near the entrance, talking with the easy posture of men who don't notice that it's cold because they've never had to notice that kind of thing. They don't glance at you. You are wearing the better coat, and it is still not the kind of coat people wear when they stand at the entrance to Trinity Church, having morning conversations about whatever it is they're having conversations about. The coats are dark wool cut to the waist, with the slight flare at the hem that means a good tailor. The shoes are leather, polished. The hands have the pale look of hands that are never cold, because they are never bare outside. These men are not rich, not by Boston standards, not by the standards of the proper Bostonians who live on Beacon Street, and whose families have had money since the China trade made them wealthy enough to stop counting. But they are comfortable. They are the kind of comfortable that is invisible to itself. The way this neighbourhood's cold is invisible to a man with a fur-lined coat. You turn away. The coal merchant's office is another 8 minutes north. You carry Mrs. Hannigan's letter in the inside pocket of your coat, folded carefully because the envelope has seen better days, and you don't want to arrive with a letter that looks like it's been slept on. Your left hand presses lightly against it through the coat as you walk. An unconscious gesture, a check, a reassurance that the thing is still there, still intact. The cold has gone past your ears now and is working on your face. You walk faster. The coal merchant's name is Abrams. The office is on a side street off Tremont, tucked between a printer and a chandler, announced by a painted sign that says Abrams and Sons Coal, Wood, Ice, and that needs a new coat of paint. The letters fading at the edges into the brown wood of the building. There's a boy about 14 in the outer office, sitting on a stool behind a high desk, doing figures in a ledger with the concentrated frown of someone who doesn't trust the numbers to stay still. You tell him who you are and where you've come from. He takes the letter into the inner office without a word. While you wait, you look around the outer office. A coal fire in a small grate. The luxury of it. To sit in a heated room. To feel the warmth from your front rather than from the floor. You stand close to the grate and let your hands open toward it. Your cracked knuckles, your coal-blackened creases. On the desk, the ledger the boy left open. You can't help seeing some of it. Columns of figures, dates, quantities. Tons of coal, prices, customer names. The numbers are large, or they seem large to you. 50 tons here, 70 there. A transaction for 200 tons to a single customer whose name you can't make out. This is what coal looks like from the top. Columns, numbers, clean figures in a ledger. Not the weight of the scoop in your shoulder, not the ash dust in your throat, not the sound of the furnace when it's dying at 4 in the morning and you have to get up and save it before anyone notices. The boy comes back out. Mr. Abrams says there's no letter to send back. He says the weight was correct and Mrs. Hannigan should have her coal measured again if she has questions. He says this with the flat delivery of someone repeating words exactly as instructed, not responsible for the contents. You stand there for a moment. Tell Mr. Abrams, you say, that Mrs. Hannigan measured it herself and she's measured coal before. The boy gives you a look that could mean anything. I'll tell him. He goes back into the inner office. You wait. The fire in the grate pops. A coal settles. The smell of it. Your smell. The smell of the basement and the furnace room and 8 months of this work seems suddenly very present in the warm office. The boy comes back. Mr. Abrams says he'll look into it. That's not an answer. That's what you say when you're not going to do anything and you'd like the conversation to end. Tell Mrs. Hannigan I'll be back to her within the week, the boy adds. This at least sounds like something he came up with himself. He has a quality of trying to be helpful within the limits of what he's been told to do, which you recognise because you have the same quality. Thank you, you say. Outside, the cold receives you again. You stand on the sidewalk with the knowledge that you've done what you were sent to do and accomplished nothing, and that you'll have to go back and tell Mrs. Hannigan this, and that Mrs. Hannigan will receive the news with the expression she uses for all failures that occur outside her immediate control. A slow compression of the lips, a slight narrowing of the eyes, the look of a woman calculating what it costs her and what she can do about it. You've seen that expression many times. It is not an expression that makes you feel like anything is going to get better. But first, you have until midday. The coal merchant's errand was supposed to take the morning. You have perhaps 2 hours. You turn south, toward the harbour. Boston Harbour in November is a different world from Boston Harbour in summer. In summer, the harbour is beautiful in the way that Boston allows itself to be beautiful. Practical and purposeful, ships and lighters and rowboats and the ferry to East Boston, all moving across the blue water, the islands in the outer harbour visible as dark green shapes in the distance. the light off the water bright enough to make you squint. In November, the harbour is something else. It's still. Not a peaceful still, a working still. The cold has taken the blue out of the water and replaced it with a dark grey-green that looks heavy, viscous, like it would resist being cut by a boat's bow. The ships at the wharves sit higher in the water, or seem to, their hulls dark with moisture. The rigging is still. The few gulls that remain are serious about it. Not the playful summer gulls, but the winter gulls, the survivors, the ones that have learned to be economical. You walk out onto T-Wharf because you need to stand somewhere where the city isn't immediately visible in every direction, where the horizon is at least partially open. The fish sheds at the end of the wharf are already operating. The first boats have been in since before dawn. The dorymen who set out in the dark and came back with the day's first catch, and the sheds are lit from inside with lanterns, and the gutting and packing is already in progress. You can hear it before you see it. The particular wet sound of fish being handled, the knock of wood on wood, the voices of men who are too cold to shout but too busy to be quiet. The smell. Fish and salt and ice and the cold harbour smell that is under everything else. The smell of deep water, of depths you haven't touched, of things that live in places without light and have never needed it. You lean on the railing at the end of the wharf and look out. A steamer is coming in from the outer harbour, trailing a thin line of smoke against the grey sky, its bow making a steady white line through the dark water. It's a medium-sized vessel, maybe 200 feet, not one of the great Atlantic liners, but a coastal steamer, something that runs between Boston and New York or Boston and Portland, carrying passengers and freight and mail in the practical back and forth of coastal commerce. You watch it come in. 8 months ago, you came into this harbour on a ship not much larger than that one. 3rd class, 11 men in the berth, 12 days out of Queenstown, the smell of which is another one you're never going to describe to polite company. The morning the ship came into Boston Harbour, you'd been on deck from 4 in the morning, standing in the cold with the other men from steerage, watching the coast come up out of the water. First the lighthouses, then the outer harbour islands, then, resolving slowly out of the grey morning, the city itself. You remember thinking, too big. The city was too big. Every building was too tall. Every street was too wide. There were too many people and too many sounds and too much of everything that had nothing to do with Claire and nothing to do with the life you knew. You still think that sometimes. But now you know the streets. You know which parts of the harbour smell of fish and which parts smell of molasses from the warehouses. You know that the steamer coming in now will tie up at a specific wharf on Atlantic Avenue, and that the men waiting to unload it will be mostly Irish, and mostly from the same 3 counties, and that 2 of them are men whose names you know from the South End boarding houses where they live. You're beginning to know this city the way you know a difficult person, not by liking them, but by understanding how they work. The steamer moves past. The wave it generates runs under the wharf, and you can feel the slight rise and fall of the planking under your boots, a motion so small it wouldn't register if you weren't paying attention. You pay attention. You always pay attention now. There is a man at the far end of the wharf leaning on a bollard smoking a pipe, watching the harbour with the concentrated stillness of someone who's been watching it for a long time. He is old, 60, maybe 70, and he has the particular weathered quality of men who've spent their lives outdoors near water. Leather-dark skin, white hair that the wind is doing things to, hands that wrap around the pipe like they're used to gripping things. He notices you noticing him. Cold morning, he says. It is, you say. First winter in Boston, you look at him. Second, you say. But first one I'll feel all the way through. He makes a sound that might be a laugh. Where from? Claire, he nods. Not the nod of someone who doesn't know where Claire is. The nod of someone who knows exactly, which means he's likely from somewhere west of the Shannon himself. Galway, he says when he sees your expression, 40 years ago, came over on a coffin ship, if you want to call it that. More of a raft with pretensions. The famine ships, that would have been the 1840s. How long before it felt like home, you ask? It's a bolder question than you'd normally risk, but something about the cold and the early morning and the harbour makes it feel like a conversation that permits directness. He takes a pull on his pipe, considers. It doesn't feel like home, he says. Not the way home did, but it stops feeling like somewhere else. Eventually. He looks at the harbour. You stop measuring the distance. He pushes off from the bollard and walks toward the street without looking back. You stand there for a while longer. The steamer is at the dock now, the lines being made fast, figures moving on the deck. Somewhere in the city behind you, the church bells are beginning to ring for 9 o'clock. You count them without meaning to, an automatic habit you've developed, calibrating your position in the day by the sound of bells from a dozen different church towers. 9 o'clock, midday meal at noon, back at the house by 11:30 to stoke the furnace before the midday check. You have things to do, but you take one more look at the harbour before you turn. The furnace is fine. You check it at 11:45, find it burning well, adjust the south damper, which has a tendency to stick and to reduce the draft when it does, add coal, listen to the fire eat it. The vibration through the floor is steady and strong. Bridget gives you your bread and a bowl of something that is mostly potato, and was probably, at some earlier point, also beef. The broth is thin and very salty. The potato is overcooked, which means it falls apart in the broth, which means it is more soup than stew, which means there is more of it to fill you up. You're choosing to see this as a positive. Coal delivery yesterday, Bridget says, not to you specifically, to the kitchen in general. Half-ton short, you say. I told Mrs. Hannigan. Bridget makes a sound. This is her standard response to information about coal deliveries, to information about everything, to the state of the weather and the reliability of suppliers and the general quality of life in this building. It's a sound that means I know. It's always like this. And I have opinions, but expressing them would cost me more energy than I have available. You eat standing in the doorway. Mrs. Hannigan comes through at noon precisely, dressed in her daily black wool, which gives her the air of a person in permanent mourning for something indefinite. She is a competent woman. You have come to understand this completely. The boarding house runs because she runs it, with the precision of someone who has calculated exactly how many people and their various needs and complaints can be managed by one person operating at maximum efficiency, and who has correctly identified you as the component of the system that will function with the least amount of supervision. Mr. Abrams, she says. He'll look into it, you say. He'll be in touch within the week. The lip compression, the eye narrowing. He'll look into it, she repeats. Yes, ma'am. A moment in which Mrs. Hannigan and the situation assess each other. The furnace has been satisfactory this week, she says, which is not the same as well done or thank you, but which is, from Mrs. Hannigan, a form of acknowledgement that you have learned to accept and even, occasionally, to value. She moves on. You finish your soup. The coal delivery comes at 2, not the delivery from Abrams and Sons. That is apparently still being looked into. But the standing order from a second supplier that Mrs. Hannigan maintains as backup, which tells you something about Mrs. Hannigan's approach to suppliers and to risk. 2 men with a horse-drawn wagon, a driver and a shoveler, and the coal comes down the chute into the bin through a metal hatch in the side of the building, and the sound of it is a sound you have come to understand viscerally. The grinding rush of coal going into the bin, the percussion of individual pieces against the metal sides, the diminishing roar as the bin fills. 1/2 ton today. Regular rate, paid by Mrs. Hannigan from the household accounts. After the delivery men leave, your job is to check the quality. This is something you've taught yourself, because no one taught it to you. You felt the difference 1 week in October when the coal was undersized and burned faster and hotter than it should have, and by the end of the week the furnace was consuming coal at a rate that alarmed you, and you went to Mrs. Hannigan, and she went to the supplier, and the supplier denied it, and the conversation went much like the conversation with Abrams. But you know now. You pick up pieces from the new delivery and feel their weight. Look at their surface. Good steam coal should have a certain lustrous black, should break with a clean fracture, shouldn't crumble when you handle it. This batch looks right. You put a piece in your pocket to check how it burns. This is what your afternoons look like in November. Checking the coal, adjusting the furnace, carrying ash. The physical reality of keeping a building warm, reduced to its components, is not interesting in the way that people mean when they say something is interesting. It doesn't have the drama of a construction site or the variety of a delivery route or the human contact of a job that puts you in front of the public. But it has its own logic, and you've entered far enough into that logic that it has become satisfying in a way you wouldn't have predicted. There is a rightness to a furnace that's burning correctly, a cleanness to a floor swept free of ash dust, the bin full of coal, neatly loaded, the pieces settled by gravity into their most efficient arrangement. You are making something work. You are keeping something alive. At 3 in the afternoon, with the furnace checked and adjusted and the bin restocked and the ash hatch latched, you sit on the coal bin lid and rest for 20 minutes. This is the 20 minutes that belong to you, the small private gap in the day's schedule that you've carved out, with the precision of someone who has very little, and therefore protects what they have very carefully. You don't sleep. You sit and breathe and listen to the furnace. Through the ceiling, Miss Alderton is giving a piano lesson. The same scale, over and over with corrections between. The patience of it. The same 8 notes. The hesitation in the same place. The gentle voice saying, "Again, please, from the beginning," has a particular quality in the silence of the basement. It sounds like someone refusing to give up on something. Someone who has decided that the thing will eventually work if you keep at it long enough. You think about this for a while. Then you get up and go back to work. By 4 o'clock, the light is going. This is one of the things about Boston in November that takes getting used to, the speed of the dark. In Clare, the autumn evenings are long, a slow dimming, the light giving up gradually, reluctantly, the way something does when it's not quite ready to leave. The sky goes through stages, amber, then rose, then a particular grey-blue that holds for almost an hour before proper darkness. In Boston, November acts differently. The sun goes behind the buildings at 3:30, and the city swallows the light like it never existed. What you're left with is the gaslight, the street lamps, lit now by lamplighters who appear every evening at dusk with their ladders and their wicks, moving through the streets with the steady efficiency of men who've done this route 1,000 times, and the warm yellow glow of windows, and the particular darkness that fills the gaps between those two lights. The darkness of alleys and doorways, and the spaces under stoops where things accumulate and sometimes sleep. You come up from the basement at 4:15 to bring in the last of the newspaper that someone left on the stoop and got rained on, and then froze into a shape that is no longer useful as a newspaper, but that you can dry out and use for fire starting. This is a habit you've developed, finding uses for things that have been declared finished. Standing on the stoop, you can see the street at the hour when it changes character. The working day is ending. Men are coming home. Not the office men, not yet, but the physical workers. The ones whose bodies mark the time more honestly than any clock. The draymen, the construction workers, the men from the rail yards and the docks. They move differently at the end of the day, heavier, slower, with a quality of inward attention, like a lamp being turned down. They're still walking, still functional, but the energy that's running them is something underneath conscious choice, the last fuel in the tank burning off. The Moriarty brothers will be home by 6. You can set your sense of the evening by them. You bring in the frozen newspaper and go back down. The midday meal was a bowl of thin soup and 2 pieces of bread. It is now 5 in the afternoon. This is a mathematical problem with a clear answer, which is that you are hungry in the specific concentrated way that comes not from missing a meal, but from the arithmetic of months of not quite enough adding up to a body that has recalibrated its expectations downward. You're not starving. Let's be precise about that. You're not starving. But you are a 21-year-old man who's been doing physical labour since 6 in the morning and who will have one more meal today, the evening meal at 7, which is provided by the house and which will be something hot and filling and not particularly interesting. Between now and 7, the hunger is a fact you carry around like the coal scoop, present, heavy. Something you've learned to grip correctly so it doesn't pull wrong. You think about food the way you think about the Hannigan family's warmth, as something that exists above you, produced by effort you supply, distributed in amounts that are calculated by someone else's arithmetic. There's a woman on Dover Street, 3 blocks away, who sells hot potatoes from a cart. Penny each. If you had a penny to spend, which you sometimes do on Thursdays after Mrs. Hannigan settles the week's accounts, you'd buy one and eat it standing on the sidewalk outside her cart, the steam coming off it into the cold air, your hands wrapped around its warmth before you peel it, which is the correct order. Warmth first, food second, when both are available in the same object. You don't have a penny today. You go back into the furnace room and check the fire again, even though you checked it 40 minutes ago and it hasn't changed. It's something to do with your hands, something to be doing while the time moves. The coal piece you put in your pocket earlier, you hold it now, turning it in. Your fingers. The surface has a blue-black sheen in the furnace light, the same sheen as a crow's wing, the same complicated darkness that isn't just black but has colour inside it if the light hits right. The piece is the size of your fist and weighs maybe half a pound and was underground for, 300 million years, longer, compressed and cooked by geological time into this dense, energy-storing, portable thing that you're now going to feed into a furnace to heat the 2nd floor of a Boston boarding house. The distance between what a thing is and what it's used for. You put the coal in the furnace. The fire accepts it. The Moriarty brothers come home at 6. You can tell the difference between their homecoming on a regular weekday and their homecoming on a Friday from the sound alone. On regular days, the front door opens and closes with the sound of men who have a specific destination in mind, their rooms, their boots off, horizontal as quickly as possible. On Friday, the door has a different cadence. It opens twice. There's a discussion at the threshold that carries through the floor of your room with the distinctive resonance of two different accents talking over each other. Something breaks. Then laughter. The specific kind of laughter that means someone has been carrying something all week that they're now putting down. You sit in your room and listen to the sounds of the house on a Friday evening. The Moriartys above, their voices shifting between English and Irish in the way that bilingual people do when they're comfortable. Sentences that start in one and finish in the other. A grammar that exists nowhere except in the particular brain that contains both languages. Bridget in the kitchen, the clatter of the supper preparations, the thin, clear notes of Miss Alderton's piano upstairs. She doesn't teach on Friday evenings, she plays for herself. And the difference between the practicing for others playing and the playing for herself playing is a difference you've come to notice. The one is careful, the other is not. Mrs. Hannigan passes your door at 6:30, going to the coal room to check the supply for the weekend. She does this every Friday. She doesn't knock because why would she knock on a storage room, which is what this basement is in her accounting of the building? Storage. Plus the useful fact that the storage sometimes generates heat and carries ash. She opens your door by mistake, or maybe it's not a mistake. For a moment she sees your room whole, the mattress on the floor, the coal grime on every surface, the candle on the shelf, the better coat on its nail, the basin in the corner with its thin ring of ice. Her face does something. It's a small thing. A flicker of something. Not quite guilt, not quite acknowledgement. Something in between those two. The expression of a person doing a calculation they've done many times before and arriving at the same answer, which is that there isn't another answer available. Supper at 7, she says. Yes, ma'am. She moves on. You sit for a moment with what just happened. Then you put on your better coat because Friday evening, because the week is over, because you're going out. The North End is a different city. It is technically the same city, the same Boston, the same harbour, the same November cold. But walking from the South End to the North End is walking through a series of transformations that happen gradually and then all at once. The South End is Irish mostly, with pockets of other things. German families on a few streets, a growing number of Jewish families moving up from the waterfront, a handful of native-born Bostonians who haven't yet decided to move somewhere more respectable. The boarding houses and the working poor and the lower middle and the aspiring, a neighbourhood in transition, not sure yet what it wants to be. The North End is Italian now mostly, has been changing that way for 5 years. The old Irish families moving out toward Charlestown and East Boston. The new Italian families moving in from the steamers, packing into the same tenement buildings with the same compressed efficiency that every wave of immigrants has used in these buildings since the neighbourhood was first built. But on the edge of the North End, in the streets around the old graveyard and the brick tenements on Fleet Street, and in the alleys running down toward the water, there are still Irish families. Old families, some of them. People who came over in the 40s during the famine, who've been in Boston for 30 years, and who remember the city when the Yankees still thought the Irish would eventually go away, and who have long since understood that not only are they not going away, but they are in the process of becoming the city. Your friend Sean Feeney, no relation to the dead Dermot Feeney who was supposed to be your contact, lives on Fleet Street, on the second floor of a tenement building that houses 12 families in the 12 rooms of its 3 floors. He works as a labourer on the construction sites and has done since he came over 4 years ago. and he has the forearms of a man who moves heavy things for a living, and the humour of a man who has decided that the alternative to finding things funny is too bleak to contemplate. You met him at the dock on the day you arrived. He was the one who told you about the job with Mrs. Hannigan. Stoker, he said. You won't love it, but you'll be warm and you'll eat and you won't sleep under a bridge, which at this particular moment are your top 3 requirements. He was right on all 3 counts. You knock on the door of his room on Friday evenings and he opens it and says Cormac in the way that sounds like a complete sentence, meaning, you're here, good, come in, the week is over, sit down. His room is small, smaller than yours, because he pays rent where you pay in labour, and the rent for a room in this building is 70 cents a week, which leaves him with less than $1 of his week's wages after rent and food. But it has a quality yours lacks. It has people in it. There are always people in Seon's room on Friday evenings. Tonight, Seon himself, sitting on the bed with his boots already off, a man called Brennan who works at the rail yards, and who has a quality of physical stillness that seems to indicate a great deal of energy, being held very carefully in reserve. A woman called Mairead, who is Brennan's wife's sister, and who is visiting from Charlestown, and who has opinions about everything, and the conversational speed to deploy them continuously. And a boy of about 16 called Padraig, who is Shion's cousin's son and has been in Boston for 3 weeks, and who sits in the corner with the expression of a person watching a play in a language they mostly don't speak yet. You take the free space on the floor by the wall, your back against the plaster, your knees up. The room is warm from the coal fire in the small grate. It smells of the day's cooking, something with onions, and of the particular warm human smell of a small room with several people in it after work, which is not an unpleasant smell, not exactly, but is very much a smell, and which is specific to this particular way of living that is the way most people in Boston live. Abrams, Seon says, when you tell him about the morning. My father's cousin knows a man who delivers for Abrams, says he shorts every delivery to the South End boarding houses by 10%, standard practice. You could report it, Mairead says, in the tone of someone who knows the answer already. To who? Brennan says. A pause that contains the whole answer to that question. To who? Mairead agrees. The conversation moves on, to the construction site, to a man on Seon's crew who's been getting wages docked for time that wasn't lost, to a Charlestown alderman who is rumoured to be amenable to certain arrangements that might or might not involve coal contracts for city buildings, to a priest at a church in the North End who has offered to write letters on behalf of men in wage disputes with their employers, to whether these letters have any effect, to whether anything has any effect. You listen more than you talk. This is your nature in groups. You collect information, you hold it. You speak when you have something to add rather than something to fill the silence with. The church fire, Padraig says from his corner. He says it like he's been waiting to say it. Everyone looks at him. What church fire, you say? The one last Tuesday on Salem Street. He says it with the particular certainty of someone who's been carrying information they think is important and hasn't had the right moment to put it down. The tenement next to St. Stephen's. I was coming back from the docks. I saw it. I heard about that, Brennan says. 2 families on the top floor. Were they out? Mairead asks. The way she says it is different from how you'd ask it. It's not asking for information, it's checking a fact she already fears. 1 family, Brennan says. The others. He doesn't finish. The room is quiet for a moment. You think about the furnace. You think about the precautions you take. checking the dampers, making sure the ash doesn't build up in the firebox, making sure the flue is drawing properly. These are things you do automatically now without thinking about them. But underneath the automaticity is a knowledge that you learned early. Fire is not a servant. Fire is a thing you're managing, not a thing you've tamed. The difference between those two is a moment's inattention, a stuck damper, a flue blocked by accumulated creosote. And in the tenements of the North End, where 12 families live in 12 rooms, and the buildings are wood-framed and 60 years old, and the chimneys haven't been cleaned since anyone can remember. Where are they now? Mered asks. The family? Nobody knows. This is also a kind of answer. You walk to Salem Street before you go home. You don't entirely know why. Something about the conversation has left an unresolved weight in your chest, and you've learned that unresolved weight has to be taken somewhere or it follows you to bed. The North End at 8 in the evening is a place of close sounds and compressed light. The streets are narrow, some of them barely wide enough for 2 people to pass, a legacy of a street plan laid down by cows in the 17th century and never substantially altered since. The gas lamps are sparser here than in the South End. The buildings lean toward each other across the alleys with the friendliness and threat of things that have been too close for too long. Salem Street is 2 blocks from where Shion lives. The tenement is easy to find. It announces itself with the particular black that fire leaves on brick, not the grey-black of coal dust or the brown-black of age, but a clean, definitive black. The black of something that has been fully converted from one state to another. The top floor of the 5-story building is where the fire burned hottest. The window frames are gone, replaced by the ragged black apertures of frames that burned and fell inward, and the brick above each window is stained with the long, upward brush stroke of smoke that fire makes as it vents through whatever opening is available. The building is still standing. Brick buildings usually survive their fires structurally. It's the wood inside that burns, the floors and the partitions and the furniture and everything else. And the brick holds the space while the interior is gutted. The street smells of it still. Not active fire smell, that sharp chemical and wood smell of a fire in progress, but the residual smell of fire that's been over for days. Wet ash, charred wood, the cold intensifying everything. There are families still in the building. You can tell by the lights in the lower floor windows. Life continuing. Meals being made, children being put to bed. The whole machinery of survival operating in the floors below the ones that burned. A woman comes out of the building's ground floor entrance, a bucket in each hand, going to the standpipe at the end of the block for water. She doesn't look at the upper floors. She's made a decision not to look at the upper floors, which is a decision you understand completely. You stand on the other side of the narrow street and look up at the burned-out windows. 2 families. You don't know their names. You didn't know them. They were people who lived in a building 2 blocks from your friend's room in a city of 300,000 people. And the city has absorbed their loss with the efficiency of a city that can't afford to stop for every loss. And tomorrow night you'll be able to walk down this street and the building will just be a building. Again, except for the black around the windows. A child comes to the window of the 2nd floor, not the burned floor, the one below, and looks out. A girl, maybe 7, her face very pale and serious in the dim light, looking at the street with the gravity of children who are processing something large that adults around them are pretending is manageable. She looks at you, you look at her. Then her mother's hand comes from behind and pulls her gently away from the window. You turn and walk back to Dewey Street. The cold is complete now, the kind of cold that stops being a physical discomfort and becomes simply the medium the world is made of. Your boots on the frozen cobblestone make a sound like a hammer. You think about fire all the way home. The supper is salt cod with potatoes and a cabbage that has been boiled past any remaining opinion about itself. It's hot and it's filling, and you eat it at the kitchen doorway as usual, standing with your bowl while Bridget works. Around you and Mr. Donahue from the second floor eats at the kitchen table with the neat, focused efficiency of a man who'd like to be done with the meal, and back at whatever he does in his room on Friday evenings, which, based on the sounds that come down through the floor, is correspondence. The regular muffled tap of a pen nib, letters being written to people in places that are not Boston. The Moriarty brothers don't take their meals with the house. They eat somewhere else on Fridays. A saloon, probably, or the kitchen of a woman one of them knows. You've pieced this together from the absence of their sound on Friday evenings in the pattern of the house's acoustics. After supper, Mrs. Hannigan's husband comes briefly through the kitchen. You've seen him perhaps 12 times, always in transit, always with the quality of a man moving between more important places, and checks the coal delivery ledger that she keeps on the shelf near the door. He runs his finger down the column of figures with a slight frown that resolves into no particular conclusion, and puts the ledger back. He doesn't acknowledge you. Not rudely, not with a deliberate non-acknowledgement of someone choosing to ignore you. More like furniture, like the coal bin. This, you've decided, is actually worse. You check the furnace at 9, at 11, at 2 in the morning. This is the rhythm of the night. Not every night. In a warm spell, the furnace holds for 6 hours without attention, and you can sleep through. But in November, when the temperature outside goes below 25, and the old building has the insulation properties of a paper bag, the furnace needs feeding every 3 hours to keep the upper floors comfortable, and every 4 hours to keep them merely cold but survivable. You've done the math. Mrs. Hannigan knows the math. This is why the room costs you nothing in rent. Your sleep is the price. At 2 in the morning, the house is completely quiet. This is the hour you know best. Better than any other hour. Better than the morning rush or the afternoon work or the Friday evenings. The 2 in the morning hour is yours completely, in the way that things are yours when no one else wants them. You sit in the furnace room with the firebox door open a crack, watching the fire. There's a philosophical simplicity to fire at 2 in the morning when you're alone. It's doing one thing. It's doing the thing it was put here to do, without complication, without the overlay of other people's requirements and expectations. The coal goes in. The coal burns. The heat goes up through the pipes and into the radiators on the floors above, where it warms the rooms of people who don't know where it comes from and who, at 2 in the morning, are not thinking about it. You are thinking about the burned building on Salem Street. You're thinking about flues. The flues in this building are brick, running up through the walls from the furnace to the roof. You've been up to look at the roof access twice, once in September when you first took the job and once last month when you thought you heard something wrong in the drawer. Both times the flues looked intact. No visible cracking, no loose mortar where you could see it, but you can only see so far. The inspection that would tell you the real condition of those flues, whether the mortar has been compromised somewhere in the 10 feet of wall you can't see, whether there's a gap that's letting heat get to the wood framing, that inspection would need a chimney sweep. Would need someone to go up the chimney with a brush. Mrs. Hannigan has not arranged this. You've mentioned it once in October. She said she'd look into it. You think about the girl at the window on Salem Street, the pale face and the serious eyes, and the mother's hand drawing her back. You make a decision. You'll mention the flues again, tomorrow, not in passing, as a specific request, with the specific language of necessity rather than suggestion. You'll say, the flues need sweeping before the deepest cold comes, and if they're not swept and there's an incident, the cost will be more than the sweep. You'll say this because it's true, and because you are the person in this building who sleeps next to the thing that could kill everyone in it, and that gives you an obligation that goes past the $1.50 a week. You add coal to the furnace, close the door. The vibration in the floor resumes. Monday brings the first real snow. Not a dusting, a proper November snowfall, the kind that comes in from the northeast with the harbour wind behind it, and transforms the city in the night so that Tuesday morning is a different world than Monday evening. You know it's happened before you open the door because the light under your door is different. The reflected grey of snowlight, diffuse and even, without the hard edges of normal morning. The areaway outside your door has a foot of snow in it. The coal chute hatch is buried. Before anything else, before the morning wash, before anything, you dig the chute clear with the shovel that Mrs. Hannigan keeps in the furnace room for exactly this eventuality, which tells you that she's been through this before, that the building's winters have a known shape to them, that the shovel in the furnace room is institutional memory made physical. The snow on the areaway steps is heavy and wet, the kind that sticks to the shovel in slabs. You dig. Your breath makes clouds. Your back makes protests that you note and set aside. The cold has a different quality in snow, less the cutting cold of bare wind off the harbour, more a surrounding cold, the cold of a world that has wrapped itself in insulation that happens to be the same temperature as the inside of a freezer. By the time you've cleared the chute and the steps, your shoulders are burning with the specific burn of muscles that have been working against resistance and are now registering their opinion of this arrangement. You go inside. You stoke the furnace until it's burning at a rate you've calibrated to the outside temperature. Snow means the building leaks warmth faster through the walls, even though the snow itself insulates slightly against the wind. The net effect is that snow days cost more coal than clear cold days, which is a thing you know from having lived through it for exactly one winter, and which feels like a substantial piece of knowledge. You bring it up with Mrs. Hannigan at noon. The coal supply, you say. With the snow, we're burning faster. We'll be short by the weekend at the current delivery schedule. She listens with her hands folded in front of her in the way she has of listening, which is very still and gives you no information about what she's thinking. Abrams hasn't responded, she says. I know, but the other supplier, I'll write to him today. If we could get it by Thursday, I'll write today. This is the extent of the conversation. She writes to the supplier. The supplier comes or doesn't. The coal arrives or doesn't. None of this is within your control once you've said the thing that needs saying, and Mrs. Hannigan knows what needs doing, even if she doesn't always do it quickly enough. The one thing she cannot afford is the furnace going cold in a serious snowstorm. The one thing that would end your particular arrangement, the room and the meal and the $1.50 a week, is the furnace going cold when it shouldn't. You both know this. It's the most stable fact in your situation. The chimney sweep comes on Wednesday. You asked again on Tuesday morning specifically, in the terms you'd rehearsed in the furnace room at 2 a.m. The flues need sweeping before the deep cold, and if there's an incident, the cost will be more than the sweep. She looked at you for a long moment with the calculation look. "I'll arrange it," she said. He arrives at 8 Wednesday morning, a boy of about 15 who is almost entirely covered in soot in a way that makes him look like an element of the building rather than a person visiting it. He has the compact, thin quality of someone whose profession has shaped his body. Smaller than average, which is the point, because chimney sweeps need to fit inside the things they're cleaning. He does the main flue in 20 minutes. From the furnace room, you can hear the sound of the brush going up, a rhythmic, slightly hollow scraping that travels down the pipe as he works. Dislodged creosote falls in occasional showers and hits the firebox door with a sound like rain on a tin roof. Black rain, years of accumulated carbon being scraped loose and brought down. When he's done, he shows you the pile of material he's collected. It fills a bucket and a half. "You were right to call me," he says. You think about Salem Street. "I know," you say. The weeks compound. You wake at 4. You stoke the furnace. You carry ash. You check the coal. You measure your existence by what the furnace needs and when. But the city is changing around you. December is approaching and Boston can feel it. The holiday decorations are going up in the shop windows on Washington Street. Pine boughs and ribbons, candles in the windows of the dressmakers and the grocers, the particular commercial warmth that the city generates in the weeks before Christmas is a kind of shared fiction. A collective pretense that the cold is cosy rather than dangerous, that the dark is festive rather than simply dark, that December is a gift rather than a gauntlet. For some people it is a gift. You see them, the Back Bay families, the Beacon Hill families, in their carriages on Tremont Street, bundled in good wool. The carriages themselves gleaming with the attention of coachmen whose job it is to make prosperity visible. They're going to concerts, to dinner parties, to the new department stores on Summer Street that have gaslit window displays designed to make the act of buying things feel like attending a spectacle. You're going to the furnace room. But something is happening to you in December that didn't happen in November or October, or in the burning summer months when you first arrived, and the heat was a different kind of relentless. You're beginning to see Boston. Not the way a newcomer sees it, with the overwhelming simultaneity of too many things at once. The city as a problem to be solved, and not quite the way a native sees it, with the selective blindness of the familiar, the way you stop noticing what you see every day. Something in between. You're beginning to see how the parts fit together. The coal in your furnace came from mines in Pennsylvania. Anthracite, hard coal, the good kind, dug out of the earth by men whose names are as unknown to you as yours is to them. It came by rail to Providence and by boat to Boston Harbor, through the wharf at Atlantic Avenue, into the warehouse of Abrams and Sons or the second supplier, into the wagon, down the chute, into the bin, into your scoop, into the furnace. That chain is 800 miles long and involves hundreds of people and 100 separate transactions. And at the end of it, the people on the upper floors of 47 Dewey Street are warm in December. The bread that Bridget bakes came from wheat grown somewhere in the interior, Kansas possibly, or Ohio, brought east by the new railroads that are changing everything, to the flour mills, to the wholesale grocers, to the barrel in the kitchen at the back of the house. Bridget's hands turned it into bread. Your hands held the bowl. The building itself, the brick came from the brickyards in Cambridge, laid by Irish hands 30 years ago. Men who came over in the famine years and built this city with the same desperation that brought you here. You are part of a chain that was running before you were born and will run after you're gone. The furnace keeps burning. The building stays warm. You have learned this much in 4 months, that the city is a system and you are in it. And being in it invisibly doesn't mean you're not essential to it. Whether essential is the same as valued is a different question, one you don't have an answer to yet. Sunday morning. The shop is closed. The law says so, same as it always has, and Mrs. Hannigan takes this seriously in the Sunday service, bells at 9 cents, and less seriously in the sense of actually verifying where her boarders go, or what they do with their Sundays once she's seen them leave the house in the direction of church. Seon meets you at the corner of Dewey Street at 9:15. Charlestown, he says, like this is a plan you've already agreed to, which you have, essentially, in the way that you agree to things with Seon, not through explicit negotiation, but through the accumulated understanding that on certain Sundays, when the weather is clear and the week has been heavy, you go somewhere that is not the basement and not Fleet Street and not the South End. How far? Walk to the ferry. Ferry to Charlestown. Walk up the hill. The hill. Bunker Hill. He says it with the tone of a man saying the name of something he's been meaning to see for 4 years and hasn't gotten to yet. They've got a monument. I know they've got a monument. 221 feet of granite. You can go up inside it. How much? He makes a face. We'll go outside. The ferry from the North End to Charlestown runs on Sundays with reduced frequency. The ferrymen observing the Lord's Day in the sense of working slightly less than they do on other days. The boat is a small steam ferry, side wheel, and it crosses the mouth of the Charles River in about 8 minutes. The winter harbour looking its most austere this morning. Dark water, pale sky. The ships at anchor in the stream, dark against the horizon like punctuation. Charlestown on a Sunday is quieter than Boston proper. It has its own quality, a neighbourhood rather than a city, smaller streets, and a slightly different character, as though the water between it and the city proper has given it permission to be a little less frantic. The Navy Yard to the east is quiet this morning. Through the gates you can see the covered dry dock, the rigging of the ships berthed there, the brick buildings of the yard's workshops. The USS Constitution is in there somewhere, Seon says, old Ironsides, still technically in commission, still part of the Navy, moored at the yard as a symbol of something. They should just let it sail, Seon says. Where? He thinks about this. Somewhere, he says. The hill is a real hill. Boston is not a city of many hills. The process of filling in the water and cutting down the high ground has been going on since the city was built, and most of what were once Boston's substantial hills have been levelled and used as fill for the expanding land. But Bunker Hill, technically Breed's Hill, which is the hill where the actual battle was fought, but the name Bunker Hill attached itself to the monument, and the monument attached itself to the neighbourhood, and now the distinction lives only in history books. Bunker Hill has been preserved. You climb it through Monument Square, which is a residential square of solid brick houses, arranged with the self-satisfaction of a neighbourhood that knows its history and has decided to live up to it. The houses are mostly Federal and Greek revival, the architecture of a generation that believed that the right shape of a building communicated the right values of the people inside it. And there, at the top, the monument. It's an obelisk, a plain granite obelisk, 221 feet of it. The stone in the same rough-hammered style as a lot of Boston's granite construction. Not smooth, not polished, but cut with a texture that holds the light and changes it, that makes the surface look slightly alive. It tapers as it rises, with the mathematical certainty of a shape that knows exactly what it's doing. The cornerstone was laid in 1825. Lafayette was here for it, the old Marquis himself, the last of the Revolution's great figures still walking the earth, and the crowd that came was so large that the procession from Boston to Charlestown was more than a mile long. It was finished in 1843. They brought the granite from Quincy, 18 miles south, and built a railroad specifically to carry the stone to the water, and then carried it by barge to Charlestown. They built a railroad to carry the stones for a monument. That fact sits with you for a moment. You stand at the base and look up. The obelisk does the thing that good tall buildings do, which is to make the sky look larger. The eye follows the tapering shaft upward, and then suddenly there's nothing but sky. And the sky, framed by having been pointed at, seems immense in a way it doesn't from street level. Sion is reading the inscription on the plaque at the base, moving his lips slightly. He does this with any text he encounters, a habit from learning to read later than he should have, in a hedge school in Galway where the priest taught in Irish and the English was an afterthought. He reads English perfectly well now, but the lip movement stuck. Around you, the city. From up here. Not from the top of the monument, just from the top of the hill, which is still high enough. You can see the shape of things. Boston is laid out below you and to the south across the river. The dome of the State House on Beacon Hill, its gold gilding visible even from here, catching the winter light with a gleam that the clouds can't quite suppress. The steeple of the Old North Church behind you, the one with the 2 lanterns and the midnight ride and all the rest of it. The history that runs so thick in these streets that you trip over it. Trinity Church in Copley Square, its tower just visible above the rooftops of the South End, and the harbour. The reason for all of it, the harbour, is the city's logic, its origin, its constant argument for its own existence. Ships have been coming into this harbour for 250 years, each one carrying something the city needed or producing something the city could sell. And the city has organised itself around this fact so completely that even now, standing on a hill a mile from the water, the harbour's influence is visible in everything. In the arrangement of the streets radiating from the waterfront, in the warehouses clustered along the shore, in the constant presence of masts and smoke on the eastern horizon. The cold is harder up here without the buildings to break the wind, but you stay. It's something, Sean says. It is. He looks at the harbour for a while. You know what gets me, he says. They built all this. They built the whole thing. And then they spent 60 years trying to make sure nobody like us could be part of it. This is true. The signs in Boston windows, no Irish need apply, still there in some places, faded now, less common than they were 20 years ago, but not gone. These are the city's other inscription, the one that doesn't get put on monuments. And now, you say? He looks out at the city, the South End, the North End, the Irish aldermen, the Irish labourers who built the new buildings, the Irish domestics in the Beacon Hill houses, the Irish in the police force and the fire companies, and the every level of the city's operations. And now we're putting ourselves into it anyway, he says, brick by brick if we have to. You think about the coal chain, the mine in Pennsylvania to the basement in the South End, the labour that moves through the city like water through a system of pipes, most of it invisible, most of it underground, all of it essential, brick by brick. Come on, Jean says, it's too cold to be philosophical. You laugh, actually laugh, the whole thing coming out at once. You started it. I know. Now I'm ending it. I need hot food. You start. Back down the hill. It happens on a Tuesday. You will remember it this way. Tuesday, December 11th, 1883, and the snow that had been threatening since morning has finally decided, and the streets are soft with new white, and the gaslight is doing the thing it does in falling snow, where each lamp becomes the centre of its own small globe of light. You're coming back from the coal merchant's office. Abrams has finally, after 3 weeks of letters and 2 weeks of Mrs. Hannigan's escalating displeasure, agreed to adjust the bill and schedule a verified delivery. And you're 2 blocks from Dewey Street when you hear the bell. Not a church bell, the fire bell. From the engine house on Harrison Avenue, a rapid, urgent clanging that has a different rhythm from the measured tolling of the hours. This bell means something is happening. This bell is directional, a sound that people orient toward. You're already running before you've decided to run. The smoke is visible from the next block, a column of it rising into the snowfall, the darkness of smoke made more visible against the white, going up and then bending south with the wind. You know the streets around here completely now, the way you know the furnace room without needing to think. You're calculating the source as you run, that direction, that distance. The wind is north to south. The smoke is rising from Dewey Street, not number 47, the building next door, number 45. By the time you reach the street, the fire company's steam engine is already on the corner, the horses stamping and steaming, the hoses being run out across the snow. Engine Company 6, their equipment gleaming despite the weather, the firemen in their dark coats and oilskin helmets working with the organised speed of people who've drilled this exact sequence many times. Number 45 is a rooming house, like Mrs. Hannigan's, 3 stories, and the fire is in the second floor. You can see it in the window, the orange glow behind. The glass, and then the glass gone, the frame gone, and the fire having found the outside air, which it celebrates by growing immediately, doubling the speed of its appetite. A crowd has gathered, always a crowd. The snow is still falling, and the crowd is standing in it with the particular stillness of people watching something they cannot affect. You look for people coming out of the building. There are people in the street already, a woman in a nightgown with a coat thrown over it, 2 men in shirt sleeves who came down too fast for their jackets, a child being carried by a man who's carrying nothing else with the focused efficiency of someone who's had to make a fast choice about what matters. They're across the street standing together looking back at the building they've just left. But the windows. On the 3rd floor a window opens. A face looks down. You can't see the face clearly in the firelight and the snow. Just the shape of a person. The suggestion of features. The firemen have a ladder. They're running it to the building's front. But the ladder is going to the 2nd floor where the fire is, where they need to get water in. The 3rd floor window, the face, you cross the street. You grab the arm of one of the firemen, a big man red-faced from exertion, who turns on you with the expression of someone in the middle of something and not available for conversation. 3rd floor, you say. There's someone up there. He looks up, sees the face in the window. He says something to another man, pointing up, and the second man looks, and there's a rapid conversation between them in the shorthand of people who do a job together every day. The ladder, the angle, the 2nd floor fire between them and the 3rd floor person. Another ladder. They have one. It's on the wagon. 2 men are unloading it. You're not a fireman. You have no business being in the middle of this. But you're also the person who understands more than almost anyone here what a fire does when it has a building to eat. You know the relationship between a furnace and the air it needs, the way fire accelerates when it finds a path through. The second floor window is putting fire into the air on the building's east side. The staircase. The staircase is a vertical shaft and fire in a shaft goes up. The third floor person needs to not use the stairs. You shout this loudly in the direction of the window. Don't use the stairs. The face in the window moves. You don't know if they've heard you, if the snow and the noise of the fire and the shouts of the firemen have swallowed your voice. The second ladder goes up. A fireman is climbing it before it's fully placed, moving with a speed that looks reckless until you understand that recklessness in this situation is the correct response to the arithmetic of a building on fire. He reaches the window. There's a person there. You can see now, more clearly, that it's a woman. Older, her hair loose, her face very white. The fireman says something to her. She shakes her head. He reaches through the window. She takes his hand. The crowd is silent. The snow falls. She comes out the window with the careful, deliberate movements of a person whose body is telling her this is impossible, but whose mind has overruled it. The fireman has her by both arms, backing down the ladder one step at a time. It takes a long time, or it seems to, probably 30 seconds, probably less. But each second is at full intensity, the way seconds are when something is at stake. They reach the ground. The crowd makes a sound that is not quite cheering, and not quite relief, but something that contains both. A collective exhalation, the sound of held breath being released by 60 people at once. You stand in the snow and watch them bring her across the street to where the other residents are gathered. The man with the child, the woman in the nightgown, the men in shirt sleeves who are going to feel that cold very soon. The firemen are getting water into the second floor now. The hose connected to the steam engine, sending water with a force that you can feel from across the street as a slight change in the air. The fire in the second floor window contracts, struggles, puts up an argument, and then, over a period of several minutes that you watch without moving, is reduced. Not extinguished, not yet, but reduced. Brought to a negotiation. The building will survive. The woman from the third floor is sitting on someone's stoop, a coat around her shoulders that belongs to one of the men from the crowd. She's not injured, shaken, deeply, but not physically hurt. Someone has given her a cup of something that might be tea, or might be something stronger, and she's holding it with both hands. You go over. You don't know why. You have no claim on this situation. You don't know her. But you find yourself standing a few feet away, not approaching exactly, just present. She looks up. Her eyes are She looks up. Her sharp, clear grey of a person who's been fully awake for longer than sleep can account for. You told me not to use the stairs, she says. The fire was in the staircase, you say. Between you and the door, she nods. Just once, the nod of someone filing information away. You're from the house next door. I am. The furnace boy. You almost say something to that. The furnace boy, 21 years old, Cormac Reardon of Clare. But you let it pass, because this isn't the moment, and because she means it as identification, not as diminishment. Yes, you say. She looks back at the building, the fireman working, the steam engine breathing smoke into the snowy air. I've been in that room for 9 years, she says. There's nothing to say to this. You don't say anything. You stand in the snow while the fire company does its work, and the woman from the third floor holds her cup with both hands, and the snow falls on Dewey Street and turns everything it touches briefly, temporarily, indiscriminately white. You check the furnace at number 47 at 9 that night. Mrs. Hannigan is still awake. She's at the kitchen table with her household ledger open, the pen in her hand, the oil lamp turning her face warm and her shadow large on the wall behind her. She looks up when you come through. "The building next door," she says. "No one hurt. One woman was on the 3rd floor, they got her out." Mrs. Hannigan looks at her ledger. "The chimney sweep," she says. "We had ours done." A pause. She makes a note in the ledger. You can see her write something, though you can't read it from where you're standing. "The furnace," she says. "Burning well. We're good on coal until Friday." She nods. Goes back to her ledger. Then, "Well done," she says. "Just that. Not about the fire. You didn't do anything about the fire that wasn't done by better equipped people. But about the flues. About the conversation you had in October, and the one you had the week before, and the specific and pointed way you said the words incident and cost. You don't say anything. You go to bed. Through the ceiling, the house breathes around you. The Moriartys, asleep or close to it. Mr. Donahue and his correspondence pen. Miss Alderton's piano, silent now. From outside, distantly, you can hear the fire company's engine still working on the building next door. The rhythmic chug of the steam pump. The sound of water. The sound of fire being argued back into nothing. You lie on your mattress and you are aware, in a way that is almost physical, of the layer of the city above you and the layer of the city below you, and your own specific position in it. Between the coal and the light. Between the foundation and the floors. In the room that isn't on any floor plan. The furnace is burning. The building is warm. You are awake, and it is late. And Boston is doing what it always does, which is to say everything simultaneously without pausing. This city gets festive whether you're in the mood for it or not. Pine boughs appear on the doors of the boarding houses, a wreath on Mrs. Hannigan's front door, which one of the Hannigan daughters made. You see this in progress through the basement window, her feet visible on the front stoop, the flash of her dress as she works. The window of the grocer on Washington Street becomes a still life. Oranges and nuts and the dried fruits that mean Christmas, arranged in a pyramid with the calculation of someone who understands that abundance, even staged abundance, makes people want to buy things. You have not sent your mother a letter since September. This is a thing you know and don't think about directly, the way you don't look directly at the furnace when it's at full burn. Your mother is in Clare, in the house with the stone walls and the low ceilings and the turf fire that puts out a particular smoke and earth smell that is the smell of your entire childhood. She is waiting for letters. She is measuring time by letters. You've been measuring time by coal deliveries. On the Wednesday before Christmas, you buy a sheet of paper and a penny stamp from the stationer's on Tremont Street, and you write a letter at the kitchen table at 9 in the morning when Bridget is out at the market and the kitchen is briefly, unexpectedly yours. The letter is short. This is not because you have nothing to say, but because you have too much, and the too much collapses under its own weight when you try to write it. You can't write about the furnace room without it sounding like complaint. You can't write about the cold without her worrying. You can't write about the fire next door without her worrying more. So you write that you are well, that the work is steady, that Boston is large and cold and interesting, that you're learning things you couldn't have learned in Clare, that you're grateful for the money she saved in the crock under the floor. That last part is true in a way that has gotten truer over 8 months, not less. The £2 and 4 shillings that paid for steerage and docking fees and the first week's food and the train from the waterfront to the South End, that money was years of her putting aside. You know what it costs. You know it now in the specific, concrete way that you know the weight of a coal scoop. You write, "I'll send money at the New Year when I have a small amount saved." This is more ambition than fact, but you intend it as fact, and intentions have to start somewhere. You seal the envelope with the flat of your palm, walk to the post office on Milk Street. The clerk takes your letter with the practiced efficiency of someone whose relationship with the mail is entirely transactional. "Claire, Ireland." "Yes." 4 to 6 weeks, you nod. She'll receive it in January. She'll read it in the same kitchen where you were a child, sitting in the same chair, with the same turf fire. She'll read your description of Boston and she'll try to put a picture to it, and she won't quite be able to, because you can't put Boston in a letter. You can barely put Boston in your own head. But she'll know you're alive. She'll know you're warm. That will be enough. The last week of December, the city is running at a slightly reduced rate, the way a machine runs when some of the operators have gone home. Some businesses are closed. The streets have a different rhythm, more family, more celebration. The saloons doing their best business of the year, the churches doing their second best. You have not taken a day off since you arrived. This is not martyrdom, it's arithmetic. The furnace needs tending 7 days a week. The coal doesn't distinguish between weekdays and Sundays. The ash accumulates without regard for holidays. You are the furnace's keeper, and the furnace has no particular theology. But on the evening of December 31st, Mrs. Hannigan comes to the basement door at 7 o'clock. She's carrying a plate. On the plate, a piece of roast, beef, a mound of potatoes, a generous spoonful of gravy. She holds it out. "Eat in the kitchen tonight," she says. "At the table." You look at her. "The table," she says again. Patient, like she's not going to say it a third time. You take the plate. You eat at the kitchen table, sitting down, at an actual chair, with the fire in the cook stove warming the room, and the lamp on the table throwing a circle of orange light on the check tablecloth. Bridget is not there. Mrs. Hannigan moves around the kitchen briefly and then disappears back to the family rooms. The house is quiet in the specific way of the last night of a year. You eat slowly. The beef is good. Real beef, the kind that's been roasted for hours, the outside caramelized and salty, the inside yielding. The potatoes are the soft, floury kind, not the watery, boiled kind. The gravy. This is the best meal you've had in 8 months. You eat every bit of it. You sit for a moment with the clean plate. Outside, distantly, the sound of bells beginning. Not the regular church bells, something more celebratory. The city waking up to the fact of midnight approaching. Shouting from somewhere in the street. The crack of something that might be fireworks or might be something else. The year is ending. You go and check the furnace. January 1st, 1884. You wake before 4. The vibration in the floor has changed, not gone, but shifted, telling you the furnace has settled and needs attention. You get up without fully waking the way you've learned to. Feet on the cold stone floor. The match, the candle, your room in the candlelight. You look at it the way you might look at a person you've been living with long enough to see clearly, without the first impression, without the alarm of newness, with the plain seeing that comes from familiarity. The walls, damp and whitewashed, the whitewash going grey in the corners where the damp is worst, the beam above your head that you don't duck anymore, the better, coat on its nail. The shelf with the matches and the candle and the small collection of objects that have accreted to you over 8 months. A river stone you picked up from the harbour beach because it was the colour of the hillsides in Clare, flat and grey-green. A penny that got too worn to spend and that you've kept because of a private superstition about coins found on the ground. A holy card your mother put in your coat pocket when you left. The image worn smooth now from being handled. The mattress that seemed so inadequate in September, and that your body has without ceremony decided is sufficient. The window above street level through which, in the summers, you will see feet passing. In winter, you see snow. This is your room. It is not enough, in the sense that it is not enough for a person, for a life, for the full scope of what a 21-year-old man from Clare with a decent mind and a willingness to work might become. But it is yours, and you are learning to understand the difference between what is not enough and what is sufficient for now, which is a distinction that Boston has been teaching you all year. One shift and one coal bucket and one cold morning at a time. You go to the furnace room. The fire is low, not out, never quite out. In all these months you've never let it go entirely out, but low. The coals settled and grey at the surface with the deep orange still alive underneath. You open the firebox door and the warmth reaches out to you, immediate and generous. The way warmth always feels generous when you've been cold. The coal scoop. Your hands around the handle, the familiar weight of a full load, the pull in your right shoulder that is so routine now it's barely discomfort. You feed the fire, listen to it eat, watch the glow deepen from orange to yellow to the clean, luminous white of a fire burning at full capacity. The building above you breathes in its sleep. The pipes begin their quiet tick and knock as the heat travels upward. The Moriarty's asleep, heavy with the previous night's celebration. Mr. Donahue, who doesn't celebrate but stays up late anyway reading. Miss Alderton, whom you've decided is probably from Vermont rather than New Hampshire based on something she said once to a student. The widow from Limerick, the printer who works nights and sleeps days and whose schedule has always seemed to you like a reasonable response to the city's noise. All of them warm, because you're awake at 4 in the morning on the first day of January, tending a fire in a basement room. February. The cold is at its peak now. The months of winter compounded into something serious and settled. The cold of a city that has stopped apologising for itself. The harbour has ice at its edges. The Charles is partially frozen. The pipes on the 3rd floor of number 47 froze for 2 days in the week before last, and Mrs. Hannigan has not said anything about this, but the expression she wears has its own detailed commentary. You stoke the furnace every 2.5 hours in the deepest cold. You have calculated with the precision of someone who has nothing to distract them at 2 in the morning, that you sleep in 4 stretches of approximately 2.5 hours each, a total of 10 hours, which is more than you would have in a regular job but is distributed throughout the 24, in a way that means you are never fully asleep and never fully awake. Your body has adapted to this. Your mind has adapted to this. Or perhaps your mind has just narrowed to fit the space available, which is what minds do when the space is consistent enough, which is a thing you've noticed without judging it, the way you notice everything now. What the city has made of you in 8 months. A man who knows the weight of coal by feel, who can read a furnace's character the way you read weather, by small signs accumulated into pattern. Who knows the sound of a building's pipes in winter and can tell from that sound which floor is coldest and which radiator valve has gone temperamental. A man who knows the streets of the South End and the North End well enough to navigate them in the dark. literally in the way the link boys used to navigate London by memory and attention rather than light. A man who has learned that invisibility is not the same as absence, that the work done below the floors is still work, that the city is built on the labour of people who don't appear in its official accounts. A man who writes letters home and receives them in return, his mother's handwriting on thin paper, the words coming from a house 6 weeks back in time, giving him news of people and places that are receding the way everything recedes when you stop living alongside it. His brother has a new job in Ennis. The neighbour's field flooded again. His mother's hands are bothering her in the cold. His mother's hands. He thinks about this sometimes. How hands remember what they've done. A man who has one friend in this city and has learned that one is enough when the one is the right one. A man who's not been back to Bunker Hill but thinks about the view from there regularly, especially in the furnace room at 3 a.m, the city he can't see but knows is there. The harbour and the dome and the ships and the 1,000 chimneys producing the 1,000 columns of smoke that hang over Boston like a permanent weather system made by humans. A man who is learning slowly what permanence might mean in this context. Not the permanence of a monument or a building, the smaller permanence of a person who has become part of a place's daily operations, who is known, at least, to the woman who rescued from the burning building and who nods at him now when she passes him on the street. To Seyon, obviously. To Bridget, who still doesn't offer her last name but who started, in December, leaving a small extra piece of bread on the edge of the counter without comment. This is not recognition, not in the official sense, not in any sense that the city would write down, but it is something. March comes. The cold breaks, not all at once, but in stages. A warm day followed by a cold week, a week of warmth followed by a late snow, the winter giving ground reluctantly, the way the things that have been in charge for a long time always give ground reluctantly. The furnace needs less attention. You sleep in longer stretches. Your body's internal clock, calibrated so precisely to the winter's demands, is disconcerted by the luxury of 6 uninterrupted hours and spends several days waking you at 2:30 out of habit before it accepts the new information. You're outside more. On a Sunday afternoon in late March, you walk from Dewey Street to the public garden, which is barely a mile but which takes you through a transformation in the city's character so complete that you've come to think of it as a kind of test. If you can walk from the South End boarding house to the public garden without losing your sense of yourself, you're all right. The public garden is in its between-season state, not the bare winter garden and not yet the spring garden, the grass still more brown than green, the tree branches budded but not leafed, the swan boats not yet running on the pond, a few families, a nurse with a pram, 2 older men on a bench having a conversation with the deliberate pace of people who have time. You sit on a bench near the central pond, the city around the garden, the brownstones of Commonwealth Avenue visible beyond the fence, their bay windows and their iron railings and their occasional glimpse of the life behind the glass, the Arlington Street Church. A horse-drawn streetcar moving along Boylston Street with the steady, inevitable progress of something on rails. You're not a different person than you were 8 months ago. This is important to understand clearly. The city doesn't transform you. You are Cormac Reardon from Clare, 21, the son of a farmer and a woman who saved money in a crock under the floorboards. You're all the things you were when you got off the steamer in September, but you know things now that you didn't know then. You know what your hands look like when they've been working for 8 months. You know the smell of a furnace room at 4 in the morning and the feel of a coal scoop in a shoulder that's done it 10,000 times. You know what it's like to sleep under the floor of a house full of people who don't know your name. You know what the view looks like from Bunker Hill. You know what fire sounds like when it's found a building. You know that Shion was right. It doesn't feel like home the way Claire felt like home. But you've stopped measuring the distance. April. The furnace is barely needed now. You bank it low in the evenings, a maintenance fire rather than a working fire, enough to take the edge off the early morning chill and no more. Your days have opened up in the way that spring opens. Things. More time, more light. The city audible from your window in a different key than it was in winter. The fish smell from the harbour comes with warmth in it now. The street outside your basement window has mud and the first tentative green of weeds in the cracks between the cobblestones. On a Friday evening in early April, you come back from Sion's room on Fleet Street at 10 o'clock. The night is cool but not cold, the difference between those two things being absolute. The difference between a thing that requires survival and a thing that requires only a coat. You walk back through streets that are becoming familiar in the deeper way, not just known, but inhabited. The grocer on Washington Street, where you have, over the months, spent a cumulative amount of money that has probably earned you a name in his private accounting, even if he's never used your name to your face. The corner where the newsboy stations himself in the mornings. The alley between Harrison Avenue and Tremont where the ice in winter always gets thickest in a particular way that requires a specific two-step to navigate, which you execute automatically now without thinking. You let yourself in through the loose board, the way you have since the week you arrived, through the dark shop, down to the basement, your room. You light the candle. The room does its thing, exists completely in the orange light, its walls and its ceiling and its objects, the better coat on the nail and the river stone on the shelf, and the holy card worn smooth from handling. The mattress on the floor, the window above, showing a strip of April night sky with 2 stars visible through the gap between the buildings. 2 stars. You sit on the mattress and take your boots off. The sounds of Dewey Street at 10 o'clock in April. A cart going by, slower than the morning carts. A night delivery of something that doesn't need to be rushed. A couple's voices, 2 registers talking over each other, fading east. From somewhere up the block, the faint ghost of a fiddle. Above you, the building breathing. The pipes cooling after a day of minimal furnace work. The Moriarty brothers, done with their week. Miss Alderton, probably reading. The building's whole population in their rooms, each of them in the private life that goes on above the floor, below the ceiling, in the space that belongs to them. And you, in the room that belongs to you. The room that isn't on the floor plan. The room that doesn't appear in the official accounting of the building's 30 rooms. The room that exists in the gap between floors, in the space the building uses for its own functioning. Your room, you lie back. The candle gutters slightly in a draught you can feel but not locate. Something in the building's architecture that sends air through this room at specific angles, that you've mapped over the months in the absent-minded way you map everything. A habit of attention that has become so automatic you barely notice. It, the stars in the window. Through the floorboards above you, one of the Moriartys says something in Irish and the other laughs. Somewhere in this city right now, a steamer is coming into the harbour with its 100 third-class passengers, each of them knowing no one, having everything and nothing, beginning the same thing you began 8 months ago. Some of them will find a say-on, some of them will find a Mrs. Hannigan, Some of them will find things worse and some things better, and most things both. They'll learn the streets. They'll learn what cold feels like in this specific latitude, with this specific harbour wind. They'll carry ash and stoke furnaces, and deliver letters and build buildings and bake bread and teach piano lessons and write in ledgers and do every one of the 1,000 things that the city needs done constantly to stay the city. And the city will mostly not know their names, but they'll be in it. They'll be part of the chain that runs from the coal mines in Pennsylvania through the harbour and the boarding house and the furnace and up through the radiators on the upper floors. You're part of the chain. The candle is burning low. You reach over and cup it with your hand, not to put it out, just to feel the warmth of it against your palm, the small private heat of a single flame in a basement room in Boston in April. Your hands, the calluses, the coal-blackened creases, the healed cut on the right index finger, the crack between the thumb and forefinger of both hands, almost closed now that the worst cold is past. The hands of a man who's been working. The hands of a person who is becoming something. Not something grand. Not the something that the men in the silk coats at Trinity Church are becoming. Not the something that the merchants in the Tremont Street offices are in the process of building. Just something. A person shaped by this city and its work. A person who knows the weight of coal and the sound of a fire that's burning. Right? And the particular comfort of a building that is warm because you made it warm. The candle goes out. You don't relight it. The room is very dark. The kind of dark that has weight. The kind you know. You're used to it now. You've learned to navigate this room completely without light. Your body knows the exact distance from the mattress to the door, knows the height of the beam above, knows the location of every object by its place in the room's geography. The sounds of Boston at this hour, the distant bell of a church, you count without trying, 11 strokes, 11 o'clock. 7 hours until the furnace needs attention. 7 hours of this. Your body settles into the mattress the way it does, finding the familiar contours. Your right shoulder, where the coal scoop has done its work, aches with the pleasant ache of use, of a thing that has been fully employed and is now fully resting. Your hands uncurl. Let them rest. Let the day go. The walk to the coal merchant, the smell of the harbour, the fire next door in its aftermath of black brick and white snow, Sean on the hill looking at the city, Mrs. Hannigan at the kitchen table with her ledger. Let all of it go, one thing at a time. The coal delivered before the deep freeze. Let that go. The chimney swept before the fire. Let that go. The letter to your mother, sealed and posted, moving on a ship somewhere in the North Atlantic, 6 weeks from Clare. Let that go. The woman from the burning building and her 9 years in a room. Let that go. The 2 stars in the window above visible for a moment before the clouds move back. Let that go. Tomorrow the furnace will need tending. Tomorrow the ash will accumulate and the coal will need measuring and the flue will need listening to. Tomorrow Bridget will hand you bread through the kitchen doorway and Mrs. Hannigan will compress her lips at some new information about suppliers. Tomorrow Boston will be Boston. But that's tomorrow. Right now there's only the dark room and the sounds of the city and the warmth in the floorboards from the furnace you tended, and the specific satisfaction of a person who has done the work that needed doing, and is now, for these hours, free of it. You are warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. You have work that keeps the cold from the people above you. You have one friend and one stone from the harbour, and one holy card worn smooth from 8 months of handling. You have hands that know what they're doing. That's not nothing. That's more than nothing. The dark is complete now. The sounds of the city fall further, not away, never away in Boston, never fully away even at midnight, but further, as though the city is moving back to give you this room, this dark, this particular silence between the sounds. Somewhere a ship is moving in the harbour, its running light a single point of green moving south. You can't see it from the basement window, but you know it's there. Somewhere a furnace is burning in a building you'll never enter. Another stoker who's also awake, also listening, also holding the building's warmth in their hands. Somewhere the city is filing away this day, adding it to the stack of all the other days, all the other people who moved through these streets and breathed this air and called themselves Bostonians before the city was ready to call them that back. You are one of them now, not by their permission, by your own insistence. Let sleep come the way it comes after the long days, the good days, the days that cost you something and gave you something in return. Let the furnace breathe and the building settle and the city do what it does at this hour without you. Let your hands rest. Let your shoulder rest. Let the sound of the harbour and the bells and the distant fiddle from somewhere on Dewey Street fold together into the particular music of a city at night, which is not music exactly, but which has rhythm, which has pattern, which has the quality of something that has been doing this for a very long time and knows how. The straw mattress, the better coat on its nail, the river stone on the shelf, the colour of Clare hillsides, the holy card. All of it right where you left it. All of it here. All of it enough for now, for tonight, for this particular January, no, April, night in this city that is too large and too loud and too much, and also slowly becoming yours. Centuries will pass. The basement room at 47 Dewey Street will be gutted and renovated, the earthen floor replaced with concrete, the coal bin converted to a storage closet for a later century's bicycles and holiday decorations. The furnace will become a gas furnace, and then a modern heating system with programmable thermostats, and no one will wake at 4 a.m. to tend it. The building will survive fires and renovations and the slow accretion of a century's worth of changes, because brick buildings are stubborn, and because buildings that have been lived in hard tend to have something in their walls that keeps them standing past the point where reason alone would argue for it. The neighbourhood will change, the south end will fall and fall and rise again, the boarding houses will become apartments, and the apartments will become condominiums, and the people who live there will pay more for one room than Cormac Riordan made in a year, and they will not think about what it cost to build this neighbourhood, which is the privilege of arrival without memory. But people will still wake in the dark. People will still listen to the building breathe at 3 a.m. People will still carry things in from the cold, and tend fires that need tending, and write letters home to people who are measuring time by the absence of letters. The human body still gets cold. The human heart still needs the same things it has always needed. And somewhere in the city, at any hour you name, someone is doing the work that keeps the warmth. Where it needs to be, let that be enough. Let that be the last thought, the work done, the fire burning, the building warm, the city breathing around you in the dark, breathing and alive. Good night.